Well, the participation rate's fallen again significantly, Tom, and the unemployment rate of 7.1% would have been much worse if not for that. So it's a significant climb, as Craig said there, but it would be a lot worse if the participation rate hadn't fallen as well. Government people I spoke to last night were suggesting that when the JobSeeker changes come into force in September, they also have to look at mutual obligation, because when you've got a participation rate falling, it's basically many people saying, look, we're not going to bother looking right now given things are so bad. So 7.1%, but there are many, many more without a job, and you're only counted as unemployed if you were looking for a job in the week of the survey. So we have to factor that in. The other thing is, of course, being propped up by the JobKeeper scenario. So we again await to see how much that is propping up the economy and the labour market. 7.1% again is a misleading figure. It's a big jump, but it could have been a lot worse.
Underemployment also up 0.7 to 13.1%. Annalise, when you look at these figures, we just heard from Craig James that we're hoping this is the peak. This will be the interesting race, if you like, the economy opening back up and some of these jobs returning as well, but also factoring in how many of those people that are going to return to work are on JobKeeper at the moment, i.e. not included, so that wouldn't affect the figure. And then once JobKeeper comes off in September, do we see another spike? The government has said jobs will be lost here, not just in a short-term sense.
And that's even still assuming that this is going to be a V-shaped recovery, which not many people are still looking at now. It does seem like it will drop off with JobKeeper in September as well, because that's when we're expecting a lot of businesses who've been kept afloat in this time to then fail. But what is also skewing these numbers is the fact that these survey participants are asked if they're actively seeking jobs. And that goes to Kieran's point there, that if there isn't the mutual obligations, if you're not being required to do these job applications, many people are saying, look, the economy's not good right now, so what's the point of looking for work? I'm at least set for the next few months. And so this is going to really change as the economy does open back up. But it's really key to keep that focus on whether the economy will be opened up. But if this is the worst it gets, we're doing extraordinarily well, really. The OECD predicted over 8% unemployment for Australia at the peak of the shutdowns. And so if we do start to regroup those numbers, that's much better than expectations. But still, that's no comfort to those people who are unemployed, are looking for work. This is really a drastic raise.
The policy question, as ever, remains, Andrew Clennell. Interesting indications from Scott Morrison this week in Parliament, talking about, yes, JobKeeper has been important, but going forward, jobs will be lost, and so there won't be necessarily an obsession with keeping people attached to a job if one day that's going to go anyway, and there could be a switch over to JobSeeker. How that works, how successful that is, and what the rate of JobSeeker are going to be pretty big questions.
We're on the way to 10% unemployment, Tom. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I don't buy for a second that it's going to peak here at 7%. I mean, these are the labour force survey figures. They are a survey. The number of people on JobSeeker, otherwise known as before Newstart or the dole, is 1.6 million. You know, 800, when there were 800,000 unemployed in this country, we had 5%. We now have 1.6 million. Now, they're not all participating. They're not, as you've all pointed out, it's a mutual obligation thing. They don't have to actively look. With the shutdowns, a number of them won't. But we have 3.3 million workers in Australia at the moment subsidised by JobKeeper. You can't tell me that at the end of this, all 3.3 million of those are going to be in a job. Some people, businesses are being kind to and giving them the JobKeeper subsidy, keeping them on the books, knowing in September when that comes off, and I expect it to come off nearly everything except a few sectors. I think Scott Morrison will keep it on for a few sectors which are affected by international border closures, etc. But when that comes off, you'll lose potentially tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands more. So really, we're looking at 10 to 12% unemployment at the back. Treasury's forecast on 8%. That's for the September quarter. So that is basically when JobKeeper ends. I'm afraid it's bad news, and it's a slow march to 10% unemployment again in this country for the first time in 20 years, 30 years.
When Scott Morrison was asked this morning, in fact, Kieran, he was asked about this hitting 10% today, he said, I don't know at the start of his answer. And look, it hasn't today, but this is the remaining point. Nobody knows that true number. how many people have these real jobs waiting for them, as Andrew Clennell was saying, at the end of JobKeeper, and how many people have something very different.
And the other point that Andrew touched on there about workers who are being kept on because the employer can use the JobKeeper scenario but know that this is only for a couple of months. The extension to that argument is how many zombie companies are still operating on the basis of JobKeeper propping up their entire workforce? How many people have simply had industry shut down completely and aren't looking because there is nowhere to look in their industry? That's why the participation rate has fallen as well. There's another component to that drop. So we've seen a major shift in our economy and the structure of it. And I think it's another reminder for Josh Frydenberg and the Prime Minister that they are going to have to be bold along with the state premiers. I know Dominic Perrottet has been leading the charge on tax reform, but I do hope that this federal government's going to seize the moment of this crisis to use the next 6 months to make a change that is going to make this recovery, as Annalise touched on, a more V-shaped one than what we're heading for right now. And Andrew, sadly, is saying it's heading to double figures. I think at the very least it's heading to double figures on what we're seeing today, Tom.
We had the figures up for you there, so 7.1%. Might just get them up for you again and talk through. Again, significant news. We know this could easily get higher, as we've all been talking about, but these are the figures right now. 7.1% unemployment, so up 0.7%, 90,000 full-time, 138,000 part-time jobs gone. This is, of course, for the month of May. Remember the lag in all of this, and this is also the first 2 weeks of May. That's when this survey is done, so that's when it ends. 62.9%. The participation rate and the drop there is a key one. So if everyone was still looking for a job that was the previous month, you can call that unemployment 8% before we even factor in anything else. Hours worked also down 0.7% as a bit of an indicator. And Annalise, again, this does feed into the policy response. All the indications are from government is that JobKeeper will go for, well, at least most sectors in September. There was an initial indication as well that might even be limited after this review that's coming up, that sectors perhaps or businesses that are seen to have mostly recovered could be taken off it. Now, the danger there, if people have already factored in JobKeeper for their business for 6 months and suddenly the future looks worse, you get another spike. You've got to be so careful taking away the assistance in this situation.
Yeah, and Kieran raised a really important point there in that we don't know a lot of these businesses that are going to fail, these zombie businesses. Treasury figures show that company insolvencies are down 39% for the month of May compared to the average of last year. So there are a lot of companies that are going now that will fail, and that means more people on the unemployment lines. And that also means that we don't know what sectors are going to be hardest hit after that. So there is likely to be that industry-specific funding, also potentially means testing for whoever can keep taking JobKeeper because they don't want those people making too much money out of it. That's been a discussion as well with JobSeeker, some people making a lot more money out of that than they were in their previous employment. And so this is going to be when we get more of that fine-tuned response. We saw JobSeeker and JobKeeper come in so quickly in response to everything shutting down globally at a speed faster than anyone alive has really seen in any kind of capacity. So there has been some waste in that section, but we will see, I think you're absolutely right, more targeted industry response, possibly for things like tourism, which will rebound, we expect, when there is a vaccine developed, or next year, as the Minister Simon Birmingham was saying yesterday.
Andrew Clennell, again, when we look forward, and the government right now knows it can't be on a victory lap on the health aspect of all of this, and even easing restrictions is going to be hard. There's a warning on a long time until we can get overseas visitors, perhaps uni students. That'll be a big help, obviously, if they can come in as pilot schemes work. But there's already the issue in Victoria, more community transmission in the past couple of days, so that's going to be tricky. I just wonder, no matter what you set JobSeeker at, even if you have this sort of mutual obligation, people going out to look for jobs, if they're just not there, that's going to cause massive consternation as well. If people are made to apply for a certain number of jobs when it just feels completely fruitless and they're thinking, why am I doing this with my time? How much money can you pump maybe into training instead? Perhaps schemes that can benefit the country in other ways, some sort of work for dole, I don't know.
Well, that's what happens in recessions. I mean, we saw it here in 1991. you still had that requirement to go to your Centrelink or CES or whatever and prove that you'd look for 2 jobs in a week or a fortnight or that sort of thing. And yes, you end up with a lot of people applying for a lot of jobs and not getting them because they're not out there. That's where you end up in a recession. We're in a recession. And yes, those restrictions coming off will help, but the trouble is that the damage has been so great to so many businesses and the economy has contracted. So, you know, you just see people left by the wayside. And it's interesting to see Scott Morrison talking about not demonising JobSeeker. Well, that's about a first for a Conservative politician, I reckon. And he knows he has to say that because, first of all, he has to take away JobKeeper. He just has to. You can't sustain that forever, certainly not in its current form. And also because he knows that there's going to be high unemployment with, through no fault of those people who are in that situation. It's going to be a distressing time for the country. And look, I mean, look at that, 230,000 jobs lost this month, 450,000 we were up here talking about being lost last month. You know, you even see job losses in our own industry, our own sector. It's just reflective of what's happening across the entire economy. And we're just not seeing it in the figures yet. The figures are going to be 1% a month, I believe. And, you know, towards the end of the year, we'll see 10% at least.
Couple of minutes left. Final thoughts from all of you, beginning with you, Kieran.
Well, one of the things we also have to factor in, Tom, when you look at the support, it's not just the headline unemployment rate or the impact on and the turmoil, the personal turmoil for hundreds of thousands of Australians. There's also the economic element in terms of demand. One of the biggest elements of our GDP is domestic and household demand. If they halve the JobSeeker allowance and the JobKeeper and so on also, the demand is going to collapse. So it's something I think that we should factor in as well, that element in terms of what the government does. Sure, in terms of the social impact, the economic impact for those individuals and businesses concerned, but also has that flow-on effect to demand in the economy if they pull the rug out in September quite significantly.
And Annalise?
Look, I think Kieran's right there. There's no comfort in being on the dole queue and being told that there's nothing more that can be done. When there's no demand, there's nothing more painful than going out for jobs and them simply not being there. I think anyone in the media knows that feeling. But this is really an opportunity for reform in so many ways. Industries are going to change. They're going to adapt. Old ways are going to go. We've seen that in the media as well. Again, it's the example when we're moving to digital. That's a time when that's going to happen in the future, and it might be accelerated by this, but there are still opportunities ahead. And so this is going to be the opportunity for the government to say, what do we want to look like as a country? Where do we want to go and what do we want to grow? And that's going to be a really powerful opportunity. But for a lot of people, this is really painful. These figures aren't good. This is really high unemployment, much higher than it should be, but it could have been a lot worse.
Andrew?
I think, you know, July 23, significant day, mark it down, make sure you're watching Sky News because this is the most important economic statement for decades. They will tell us then what they are going to do with JobKeeper or what they are going to do if they end JobKeeper. I know Kieran has been saying to me on Afternoon Agenda, he thinks the October budget will be the most significant financial document that he's seen in 20 years or so here. And we may actually have that in terms of the July 23 document from what I'm hearing. So the statement then, that is what we're all waiting for, to see a way out of this. Scott Morrison at pains to say we can't spend our way out of this. A lot of economists say you're going to have to. I feel there needs to be a move into infrastructure, go really hard on infrastructure, and that will, unfortunately for Scott Morrison, mean increased government spending if you are to stop unemployment going above 10%. That is the way out, I believe. That's where the argument comes that Kieran talks about with tax reform and ways to fund that. They're the very difficult political and economic discussions that are going to come out of all of this, and that will really decide Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg's fate and legacies at the end of this. It's a difficult situation for any government.